So welcome to Ottawa. I hope you had a nice trip up. You're enjoying the cool weather. And who wants to start? Chief,
Yes.
please.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, honorable senators. I am Chief Joseph Bevan of the Kitsillis First Nation. I have the privilege to serve as chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. Before I move to the bulk of my presentation, our group would like to acknowledge that we are conducting our business today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I also wanted to thank the committee for inviting us here today to talk about the work in support of First Nation communities who are participating in the business of the Major Projects Coalition. With me today are two members of the coalition, Chief Corina Lewin from the Cheslata Carrier Nation and Councillor Angel Ranson from the Kasgi Wooten. Like my community of Kitsillis, which is part of the Tsimshian Nation, located in BC's North Coast region, each of our respective territories are impacted by major projects of some kind. Chief Lewin and Councillor Ranson will offer their own perspective about how these impacts are being dealt with in their communities. Also with us today is Mr. Del Natras. As former executive of the oil and gas industry, Mr. Natras plays a role in the development of economic options and financial perspectives to assist the coalition in assessing opportunities for First Nations, to participate in major projects. Mr. Natras has authored some of the technical reports and is able to provide answers to the questions that are of technical nature. The national economy and financial well-being of Canadians is directly tied to the development of our natural resources and their ability to reach export markets. Nearly 1.8 million jobs are directly and indirectly related to the natural resources of Canada, including 30,000 Aboriginal people. If we were to look at a map of Canada and identify each proposed major project from the west to the east, what would we find? Is that with each project, there are interests of First Nations people impacted by each project. If we were to take a map and draw a line across Canada representing a corridor running from the west to the east, we would find a right-of-way impacting the interests of many First Nations. At the same time, many of those First Nation communities are struggling with systematic poverty, social issues, lower educations attained, and many lacking the opportunity to find and be trained for meaningful employment. Can we work together to create prosperity where there is poverty? How can the business interests of First Nations impacted by major projects be accommodated in a meaningful way? What does this look like? Can it involve First Nations participating as equity owners in projects and involving us as part of the management decisions? Is there an approach to environmental stewardship and the mitigation of cumulative impacts caused by major project development, and that can be established in a manner that deals with the interests that are unique to First Nations? These are the areas of work that are under consideration by the Coalition. The Coalition is not a project negotiation platform. We disseminate technical information provided by experts to individual First Nations, normally who would not have access to this information. The policy objectives and technical work of the Coalition is designed to inform project negotiations at a community level. Our work is designed to build capacity in areas of critical need. The principles of free, prior, and informed consent require investment in capacity of First Nations. We need to know what we're being asked to deal with, and we need to have the resources to properly identify the opportunities and risks for our people so that we can make informed decisions.
Thank you. Just from a grassroots perspective and from a community that is not exactly on the pipeline area, I would just like to say that in order for us to support or to provide any kind of environmental impacts to any of the territories that we live on, we need to gather our First Nations back home and come together and provide that information, that background information of their territories. And with our coalition, that's what we're trying to do, is just gather all that information together so that we can either support each other or that we can provide information for a table such as this so we can move forward. So it's all, to me, as at the grassroots level, it's about gathering all that information so we can actually support each other.
Thank you. Sorry.
I've got Senator Campbell, Senator Day, Senator Tannis, Senator Ringuette. So you know
Thank
your
you.
turn is Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to apologize for my being late today, and I'd like to hire both your organizations to figure out how to build a corridor between Parliament Hill and here during rush hour. And I will raise the money for it. To all of my colleagues here, this is an example of why BC leads in First Nations governance, First Nations vision, and First Nations opportunities. These two groups right here are the gold standards, as far as I'm concerned, for Canada and for a new relationship that I've been hearing about for virtually all of my life, certainly when I was in Vancouver. With regards to the corridor, you know, I was thinking about this the other night about how, you know, we always talk about consent and sharing information and that. And I thought, you know, if the Squamish First Nation, for instance, was a business, and I wanted to go across your land to do something, there would be no question of the negotiations that would go on and the sharing of information. And I wonder why do we have such a difficult time doing that between governments, between the First Nations government and the Canadian government, and especially on something that I believe is probably the most important infrastructure project since the railway went across Canada.
I always thought it was just money and business. It's not. I sat down with the elders. I sat in a room, and for about 20 minutes, nobody spoke. When I had my Métis vest on, and one of them eventually came up and asked me about the vest, and it broke the ice. And then we got into what we wanted to talk about. And they told me right up the bat, the number one thing is the environment. They told me the sad things about the social problems they have with youth, lack of respect, everything. But the environment was number one as far as they were concerned. So First Nations want to approach the protection of the environment from a position of influence, and rightly so, I believe. I've seen firsthand what inadequate land use planning policy has done to First Nations traditional territory in northeastern BC, where most of the LNG extraction takes place. That's in the northeast, by the way. It is circumstances like these that have shaken First Nations trust in existing Crown processes around major project development. It is through ownership in proposed major projects that First Nations stand to gain the most benefit in influencing the management decisions of a project, mitigating risk to the environment. Senators, let me tell you, I flew for an hour and 40 minutes in a helicopter over what was once the most productive game area in the world. And we were flying at 500 feet above the ground. Never saw a single moose. Only thing you could see was wolves. Totally destroyed. This is the Northeast. This is out of Fort Nelson. So I can't impress on you. You can see, and you see water left at these fracking sites, brown water. There's no brown water in the north unless it's made by man.
See, from Harold, if we had a two-pager that said how we'd like to progress, because it could be tied into the corridor concept. And the corridor concept, of course, is just a right of way where you're going to get land. You're going to make sure you do all your geopolitics and your topographical maps, etc. But we need to know from the First Nations folks how they see it, so that we could start it. And then if we have the initiative, maybe then we can find private partners and stuff and get a group together. But
Good.
we need to know. Everyone says, let the First Nations people tell you. Well, tell us.
Well, look, Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I bring Harold to the table?
Mind it all, Harold.
Colleagues, this is good?
Senator, then I've got Senator Massacott, Senator Tanis, and Senator Day. So
Oh, okay.
we've got 10 minutes left.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good idea. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. They want a two-pager, Senator.
We can give you a two-pager, but there's a couple of questions I think you need. You asked some very relevant questions. Senator Wallen, we're not looking for government money. We want private sector money. We want the federal loan guarantee for that. So this is not going to be a burden if you go down this path. There is going to be a need for some money to invest in the capacity development, and we're getting a lot of cooperation on that now. So the important thing to remember is this approach is not putting a multi-billion-dollar burden. We want to go to the private sector the same place everybody else goes. We just need support to get there the way Jerry got the support to buy his first house. I want to talk about the wood fiber project because you've asked a really relevant question. How do you get there? Where do you start? Well, I respectfully suggest there are two places to start. The First Nation engagement in the environmental assessment process needs to be recognized, not as a policy matter, as a legislative matter. The Squamish Nation undertook its own environmental assessment process, as I told you before, issued its own certificate. The matters that were important, as Jerry referred to earlier about the environment being the #1 priority in our communities, were addressed in the agreement we had with the proponent. Squamish gained the right to determine what cooling system would be used in the LNG plant. And we said, you're not using house sound because it's just recovered from the copper mine. You're going to use air. You're also not going to use LNG and put more hydrocarbons in the air. You're going to use electricity. You're going to move the pipeline. You're going to move the pumping station to deal with some issues. Significant things that have to happen, okay? I think that the project, it's not insignificant, but it's not huge. The economic benefit sharing agreement were reached, okay? We got to that place. And there will be, in the future, significant opportunities that will flow to Squamish from those opportunities. You don't have that opportunity in a $40 billion project. If you want to start somewhere, start by having the federal government say, for the right projects, a loan guarantee is on the table. 5 years ago, I went around the country with the Public Policy Forum to talk to industry and others about First Nation participation in major projects. Industry said if we're going to put equity on the table in any significant manner, it's got to be bought, not given. Now, so that's where we start, Senator, is to say, yes, there's going to be an approach towards environmental assessment that recognizes the legitimacy of First Nations as governments making decisions. I will tell you that the Squamish process has resulted in a final investment decision by the proponent to actually build the plant and bring the natural gas there to ship overseas. It's the only project that has gotten a final investment decision, and it was done through the cooperation of the First Nation and the proponent and the province and the federal government for a period of time to stand down and let us do our environmental assessment process.